Carry on the Flame, Destiny's Call, Chapter 1. Across from Chpt was a closed wooden door bearing a sign that read, Dr. Philip Duluth, Court Psychiatrist, in large black letters. Whenever she glanced at it, her palms began to sweat. Chpt, don't dawdle, Aunt Phoebe scolded. Chpt jerked her head up. Her aunt's voice grated against the tender parts of her heart. Pay attention, Aunt Phoebe said. Behind the reception desk in the narrow waiting room sat a middle-aged matron watching a computer screen. The doctor will be with you shortly, Mrs. Hanson said. You can verify our records while you wait. It says here that you're 17. Are these your legal guardians? She asked, pointing to Chpt's Aunt Phoebe and Uncle Larry. Chpt nodded. Very well. I'll need you to sign some paperwork. Chpt's Aunt Phoebe and Uncle Larry stepped over to the desk. Aunt Phoebe grabbed a pen and took over filling in the forms. Uncle Larry stood beside his wife, his shoulders rounded. He turned his head to give Chpt a weak smile of encouragement, then turned back and stared silently at the yellowed floral paintings on the wall behind Mrs. Hanson's desk. Chpt slumped in her chair. She willed herself to look elsewhere, anywhere but that wooden door with its brass nameplate, Dr. Duluth. Aunt Phoebe sighed impatiently. I've already given the court the information on this form. Chpt clutched the sides of her chair and cautiously watched her aunt. Our office requires your confirmation, Mrs. Hanson replied curtly. Well, I suppose one does what one must for the sake of the girl. I've done so for over 7 years now. Isn't that right, Chpt? Aunt Phoebe said. Mm-hmm, Chpt murmured and thought 7 years, 4 months, 3 days. The buzz of a speakerphone and the sound of a chair scraping across the floor interrupted Chpt's thoughts. Mrs. Hanson walked over to the door Chpt could no longer avoid. Using her shoulder for leverage, she propped it open and motioned for Chpt. Chpt stepped through the door alone. Dr. Duluth didn't look up when Chpt entered. He was older than her uncle, his gray hair cut short around a receding hairline. The broad expanse of his desk with its stacks of neatly piled papers formed a barrier that made Chpt feel safer. She inched forward and sat down in one of the 3 chairs facing the desk. She jumped when the door clicked shut behind her. The doctor continued to silently read from his stack of papers. Scarcely breathing, afraid to make a sound, Chpt sat rigid, her hands now tucked beneath her thighs. Dr. Duluth looked up from his papers and smiled, though his gray eyes remained impassive. I'm Dr. Duluth. I know. Do you know why you're here? Yes, sir. Tell me. Aunt Phoebe says if I don't do well today, you'll put me in the psychiatric hospital. We're trying to do what's best for you, Chpt. Chpt remained silent. Okay, let's get started then. Let's talk about your guardians. What's your relationship with your Aunt Phoebe and your Uncle Larry? Chpt squirmed. I live with them. They look after me. Do you get along? He asked. Like I said, we live together, Chpt answered. Dr. Duluth studied her, his chin resting on his hand. I see. Chpt stared back at him. How old were you when your parents passed away? Dr. Duluth asked. 10. Did you get along with them? Yes. Did you do things together? Yes. Chpt's right heel bounced up and down. Did you have fun with them? Yes, she said quietly. I remember what it was like before Aunt Phoebe came. Go on, Dr. Duluth said. My parents loved me.